I'm very much of the opinion that we are born with our rights. It's not a matter of being necessarily, like the whole reason we've got, for example, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was the idea that every person, regardless of what country, and if you're born in a communist country, you should still have these human rights. And maybe your government isn't protecting those rights, but you are. The idea is that you're still born with them, and you should be able to express those freedoms and those rights. And even if it means going to another country, for example, just because you're from another country doesn't mean you don't have those rights with you, right? And I remember, if you know the comedian George Carlin, he's made a criticism about that. We brag about how we've got these rights, especially in America where they've got the Bill of Rights, but then when you really need them, that's when they happen to not be there. And he said that you don't have rights, you have privileges, and that's how the government treats them. And I don't like that. I don't like that. For example, we see when it comes to our freedom of movement being linked to like a vaccine passport, right? That's taking away that it's being a freedom of movement and making it a conditional privilege where you have to meet this condition and then you'll have the privilege of having this. But then, for example, you may not get the jab that's a booster shot, and then that privilege is taken away from you again. And that seems to me how we're viewing our rights in this time, where culturally people are starting to view them as a privilege that is granted to you by the government, and the government can take it away when need be. I'm not a fan of that perspective, and I think that that's something that I've been trying to work against, that kind of perspective that it is just a privilege that's granted to us. It's if we don't value these rights, a government will be able to take them away, and if you don't value them and cherish them, then it's going to be the next generation that's born without them. Something as simple as traveling, like the fact that we had like 5 kilometer radius limits, right? Imagine the next generation just has kilometer radius limits as the norm. You could explain to them how you used to be able to travel all across the country without needing even a passport, but that's going to be something that's difficult for them to even imagine. So as much as I recognize that at times there may need to be limitations on rights, I think that it is a very, very fine line to walk, and I'm not really much of a fan of our rights being infringed in any way.
Yeah. Join the crew.
Like for example, when it comes to something like freedom of movement, right? When you look at the way that has been limited before all of this, it may have been, for example, someone going to prison, where it's like, all right, you've committed a crime, because we need you to go to prison, you're going to have your right to freedom of movement infringed because we need you to stay in a prison.
Sure.
Quarantine is another one that kind of can be linked to that.
I'm glad you brought this, and I want to just spend a bit of time on this because I love this kind of stuff, because classically my understanding of this I'm really into libertarian philosophy, that kind of stuff. And like John Locke and various philosophers address this kind of stuff. Like, I'm sure you're familiar with the whole idea of non-aggression principle and that whole kind of thing. And whereas when, like, my perspective in regards to you committing a violation, like if someone had actually committed a crime, like actually hurt someone, then obviously restricting their freedoms is justifiable because they've initiated violence, right? But when we're dealing in this realm of potentiality, where we're assuming that someone is going to be committing some kind of harm because they're a potential bag of virus, that's when we get into this realm of like just of ephemeral just craziness, where you can say you're going to restrict someone's right because you see them as being a potential criminal because they may be carrying a virus. You see where I'm going with this? And
totally.
Now you can make this appeal to potentiality. Like you can't leave your home, Willie, because you might be infecting someone. And this is what the government is doing. And whereas I understand what you're saying, that you obviously need to have certain restrictions on freedoms, classically that happens when my whole attitude is, provided you're not actually infringing on anyone else's rights, then you should be able to live freely. But the government has taken like a complete mile with this thing and said, well, if you're potentially infringing on someone's right by potentially infecting someone with the virus, then we're going to lock you in your home. And that's when we get this scenario that we're in.
Yeah. So, our whole justice system is based on the idea that it's better for an innocent man or it's better for a guilty man to go free rather than to imprison people that haven't actually committed a crime, right? We're kind of doing the opposite of that now, where we're assuming that you're guilty rather than, the whole idea is meant to be that you're supposed to prove beyond reasonable doubt that someone is guilty, not just assume that they're guilty. You know what I mean? We're supposed to be assuming that people are innocent unless proven otherwise.